There is a kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, a weariness that sits underneath your skin, underneath your thoughts, underneath the smile you keep putting on for everyone else to see. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you've been carrying something for so long that you've forgotten what it felt like to set it down, and somewhere along the way, you started to believe that no one really understands. Not your friends, not your family, not even the people who love you the most. You've tried to explain it before and watched their eyes glaze over or their attention drift or their advice miss the point entirely. So you stopped trying, you folded the explanation back up and tucked it away, and you learned to carry it alone. But here is something worth sitting with tonight. God understands everything, not most things, not the parts that are easy to explain. Everything. He understands the version of your story that you've never said out loud. He understands the thought you had at 2 a.m. that scared you. He understands the anger you swallowed so it wouldn't hurt someone you love. He understands the grief you never finished grieving because life didn't give you the time. He understands all of it, not from a distance, not as an observer reading a report, but as someone who was there when it happened, watching, staying, present in the middle of it with you. We spend so much of our lives trying to be understood. We choose our words carefully, hoping this time the other person will finally get it. We share pieces of ourselves and wait to see if they'll be received with care or with confusion. And so often, the waiting ends in disappointment, not because people don't love us, but because understanding another human being completely is simply beyond what any person can do. We are finite. We see in fragments. We hear in half sentences. Even the closest relationships are built on partial understanding, patched together with trust and grace for the gaps. But God is not finite. He is not limited to fragments. He does not need you to explain yourself in order to understand you. He knew the whole story before you lived a single day of it. He knew the shape of your suffering before it arrived, and he knew the shape of your healing before you ever believed healing was possible. This is not a small thing. This is the difference between being known by someone who loves you and being fully known by the one who made you. Think about what it means to be fully known. Not known in pieces, not known through a highlight reel, known completely. The doubt and the faith together. The sin and the repentance together. The strength and the fear together. Most of us spend our whole lives hiding at least one part of ourselves because we believe if people saw all of it, they would leave. We curate, we edit. We present the parts that are safe and bury the parts that feel shameful. And even our closest relationships are built on that curated version. But you cannot curate yourself before God. There is nothing to hide because there is nothing hidden from him in the first place. He already sees what you've spent years trying to conceal. And here is the astonishing part. He stays anyway. He doesn't turn away from what you're ashamed of. He doesn't flinch at what you think would disqualify you from love. He simply understands, and he remains. Maybe you're carrying something tonight that you've never told anyone, a decision you regret, a relationship that ended in a way you can't explain, a season where your faith went quiet and you didn't know how to talk about it without sounding like you'd failed, a private struggle that you've managed to keep hidden behind a well-practiced smile. You've been so afraid that if anyone truly knew, they would judge you, or pity you, or simply not know what to do with you. So you've stayed quiet, and in that quiet, you've felt alone. But you were never actually alone in it. God was there in the room when the decision was made. He was there in the years since, watching you carry the weight of it. He was there in the silence you kept, in the nights you lay awake turning it over in your mind. He understood the moment before you understood it yourself. And he has never once needed you to explain it to him, because he was never confused about who you are or what you've been through. There is a strange kind of relief in that. Relief that doesn't come from being fixed, but from being known. Sometimes what we need most isn't a solution. It's the simple, steadying comfort of not having to explain ourselves anymore, of not having to perform understanding for someone else's benefit, of being able to just exist, exactly as we are, in front of someone who already sees the whole picture and isn't going anywhere. This is part of why prayer can feel different from every other kind of conversation. When you pray, you are not informing God of anything. You are not filling him in. You are simply being present with someone who already knows and inviting him into the parts of your life you usually keep sealed off. Prayer, at its quietest and most honest, is less about talking and more about being known. It is less about finding the right words and more about letting go of the need for words at all. Maybe that's why so many of us struggle with prayer when things get hard. We feel like we need to explain our pain in a way that makes sense, to justify our doubts, to present our case clearly before we're allowed to ask for help. But God doesn't need the polished version. He doesn't need the version where you've already processed your feelings and arrived at a tidy conclusion. He can meet you in the mess, the half-formed thought, the tears that don't turn into full sentences, the silence when you don't know what to say at all. There is a passage in the human experience, a wordless place, where language runs out, grief that goes past what a sentence can hold, fear that doesn't have a shape you can describe, joy that overflows the words meant to contain it. In all of those moments when your own vocabulary fails you, God is not waiting for you to find better words. He already understands what you cannot say. He reads the language underneath language, the language of a heart trying to make sense of being alive. This matters because so much of our suffering comes from feeling unseen. It's not always the hard circumstance itself that breaks us. It's the loneliness of believing that no one else could possibly understand what we're going through. That isolation deepens pain in a way that almost nothing else does. And so when we begin to trust that we are actually understood completely, without needing to translate ourselves, something in us begins to soften. The isolation loosens its grip, even if the circumstance hasn't changed at all. Think of the times you felt most alone. Maybe it was in a hospital waiting room, surrounded by people, yet somehow entirely by yourself. Maybe it was after a loss, when everyone else's life kept moving while yours stood still. Maybe it was in a season of doubt, sitting in a pew, surrounded by people who all seemed so certain, while you quietly wondered if you were the only one who felt distant from God. In every one of those moments, even when it felt like no one understood, you were understood, fully, completely, not because someone told you the right thing to make it feel that way, but because it was simply true the whole time. There's a difference between being comforted and being understood. Comfort can come and go. A kind word helps for a moment, and then the ache returns. But understanding is different. Understanding means someone has actually entered into what you're carrying, not just acknowledged it from a distance. And this is what makes God's understanding so different from anything a person can offer. He doesn't observe your pain from outside of it. He entered into human life fully, and he knows what it costs to be human. The exhaustion, the temptation, the grief, the fear of being misunderstood, the longing to be loved without conditions. This changes the way we can think about our own suffering. It is not simply that God watches you suffer with compassion, the way a caring friend might watch from a distance. It's that he has walked through suffering himself. And so when he understands what you're going through, it isn't theoretical. It isn't abstract sympathy. It is understanding shaped by experience. He knows what betrayal feels like. He knows what exhaustion feels like. He knows what it is to be misunderstood by the people closest to you. He knows what it is to carry a burden that no one else could carry for you. So, when you feel like your struggle is too strange, too messy, too shameful, too complicated to bring to God, remember that there is nothing about your experience that catches him off guard. He is not shocked by your doubt. He is not surprised by your anger. He is not scandalized by your questions. These are not new to him. He has already understood every version of the human heart that has ever existed, including yours. Including the parts you haven't even fully understood about yourself yet. There is something freeing about that. Freeing, because it means you don't have to manage your relationship with God the way you manage your relationships with people. You don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing or revealing too much or being too complicated. You don't have to perform stability you don't feel. You don't have to pretend your faith is stronger than it is on the days it feels paper thin. You can simply come as you are, because coming as you are was always the only way to come. Let's slow down here for a moment, because this truth deserves to be sat with, not just heard and moved past. God understands everything. Say that to yourself slowly. Not everything about your circumstances, everything about you, your history, your patterns, your fears. The reasons behind the reasons you give people when they ask why you are the way you are. The parts of your personality you've never fully explained because you don't fully understand them yourself. All of it is known. All of it is held. None of it disqualifies you from being loved. Maybe tonight you're thinking about a specific weight, a conversation you wish had gone differently, a choice you made in a moment of weakness that still visits you in quiet moments, a relationship where you were hurt in ways you've never told anyone about because explaining it would mean reliving it, a private ache that shows up at strange hours, uninvited, unwelcome, and impossible to fully put into words. You have carried that alone for so long that the aloneness has become part of the ache itself. Here is what is true, even in this moment. God understands the weight of it. Not a simplified version, not a summary. The whole thing, with all its complexity and contradiction. He understands why you responded the way you did. He understands what led you there. He understands the fear underneath the anger, and the love underneath the fear, and the exhaustion underneath all of it. You do not have to explain yourself to be understood. You already are. This truth also changes the way we can look at other people. If God fully understands each of us, including the parts we hide, the parts we're ashamed of, the parts we don't even understand ourselves, then maybe we can extend a little more patience to the people around us. Maybe the person who hurt you was carrying something you never saw. Maybe the friend who disappeared during your hardest season was drowning in something of their own. This doesn't excuse harm, and it doesn't mean every wound should be minimized, but there is a kind of humility that grows when we remember how deeply mysterious every human being is, how much of their story we will never fully know, even when we love them, and in turn, maybe we can be gentler with ourselves. So many of us carry a private, exhausting habit of self-judgment, replaying our failures, rehearsing our worst moments, convinced that if we just examined ourselves harshly enough, we'd finally become who we're supposed to be. But that isn't how understanding works, and it certainly isn't how grace works. You are not required to fully understand yourself before you can be loved. You're not required to have all the answers about your own heart before you're allowed to rest. God already understands what you're still trying to figure out. That is not a burden. That is mercy. There's a particular kind of comfort that comes from being known by someone who isn't overwhelmed by what they see. Human relationships often carry an unspoken limit, a point past which honesty starts to feel like too much, where sharing your full self risks pushing someone away. We learn, often painfully, which parts of us are welcome and which parts are not. But there is no such limit with God. There is no version of your honesty that is too much for Him. There is no confession that exceeds His capacity to receive it with love. You cannot overwhelm the one who already knows everything and chose you anyway. Consider, for a moment, the quiet relief of a friendship where you don't have to explain yourself, where a shorthand exists built over years, so that a single glance or a half-finished sentence is enough to be understood. Those friendships are rare and precious because most relationships require constant translation, but even the deepest human friendship is still translation. It is still two people trying, imperfectly, to bridge the gap between their inner worlds. Only God requires no translation at all. He is already fluent in the language of your heart, in every dialect it has ever spoken, in joy and in grief, in doubt and in conviction, in silence and in words. This is why surrender can feel so different from resignation. Resignation says, I give up because I have no other choice. Surrender says, I release this because I trust the one who is holding it understands it better than I ever could. When you bring your confusion, your unanswered questions, your unresolved pain to God, you are not handing them to someone who will be baffled by the complexity. You're handing them to someone who already understands every layer, someone who was never confused in the first place. Maybe tonight, instead of trying to sort through everything on your own, you can simply say, you already understand this better than I do. I don't need to explain it perfectly. I don't need to have the right words. I don't need to make sense of it before I bring it to you. You already know what I'm carrying, and you are not overwhelmed by it. That is not weakness. That is one of the most honest prayers a person can pray. To stop performing understanding you don't have, and rest in the understanding of the one who does. There's a stillness that comes when you stop trying to be understood by everyone around you, and instead rest in being fully known by God. It doesn't mean you stop longing for connection with people. It doesn't mean human relationships become unnecessary. But it does mean that the weight you've been placing on other people to fully see you, fully hear you, fully understand you, can be set down, at least in part. Because the deepest need underneath all of that longing, the need to be truly known and still loved, has already been met. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to be understood, rehearsing explanations, choosing your words to avoid being misjudged, holding back parts of your story because you're not sure how they'll be received. That effort is exhausting, and it's not sustainable to carry it in every relationship, at every hour, for the rest of your life. But you don't have to carry that same effort with God. There is no explaining required. There is no translating required. There is only honesty, offered freely, to someone who already understood before you spoke a single word. This is not permission to withdraw from people or to stop trying to communicate with those you love. Human connection matters. Being known by others, even imperfectly, is part of what makes life feel whole. But it does mean you can release the pressure of needing to be perfectly understood by everyone, all the time, in order to feel secure. Your security was never meant to rest there. It was always meant to rest in the fact that you are fully known by God and fully loved regardless. So, if tonight you feel unseen, if you feel like the people around you have only ever gotten a fraction of who you really are, if you feel like your pain is too complicated to explain and too heavy to carry alone, let this settle over you like something warm. You are understood. Not partially, not conditionally, not once you clean yourself up or explain yourself well enough. You are understood right now, in this exact moment, exactly as you are. He understands the parts of your story you're proud of and the parts you'd rather forget. He understands the prayers you've prayed 100 times without an answer and the ones you've been too afraid to pray at all. He understands the anger you've felt toward him and the guilt you've felt for feeling angry. He understands the exhaustion of trying to hold your life together and the fear of what happens if you finally let it fall apart. None of it surprises him, none of it disqualifies you, all of it is already known, already held, already understood. There is nothing you need to hide tonight, nothing you need to explain, nothing you need to prove. You can simply rest because the one who understands everything about you has never once let go. Let your shoulders drop, let your breath slow, let the version of yourself you've been protecting finally relax, because there is no version of you that needs protecting from him. He has seen it all, and he has stayed. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let this truth settle deeper than your thoughts. You are known, you are understood. Every question you carry, every fear you haven't said out loud, every quiet grief, every private joy, all of it is held by someone who was never confused about who you are. You don't have to earn that understanding. You don't have to explain your way into it. It was already yours, long before tonight, and it will still be yours long after you wake. Rest now, not because everything is resolved, not because every question has an answer, but because you are fully known and fully understood by the only one whose understanding was never limited in the first place. Let that be enough for tonight. Let that be the last thought before sleep takes you. God understands everything, and in that understanding, you are safe. Let's stay here a little longer, because this kind of truth doesn't finish its work in a single sitting. It settles slowly, the way warmth spreads through a cold room, one corner at a time. So take a breath, and let's keep going. Think about how much of your life has been shaped by the fear of being misunderstood. Maybe you learned early on that certain feelings weren't welcome. Maybe you were told, in ways spoken or unspoken, that some parts of you were too much, too sensitive, too intense, too complicated, too different. And so you adapted. You learned which parts of yourself to show and which to keep hidden. You became fluent in editing yourself before anyone else could reject the unedited version. That skill may have protected you once. It may have helped you survive relationships or situations where honesty wasn't safe. But it comes at a cost. Over time, the parts of you that you keep hidden don't just disappear. They wait. They sit quietly beneath the surface, and sometimes they surface as anxiety or exhaustion or a strange sadness that doesn't seem to have a clear cause. The weight of hiding is heavier than most people realize, because it requires constant vigilance, constant management, constant performance. But here, in this quiet space, none of that performance is necessary. God has never needed the edited version of you. He has never required the version with the difficult parts removed. He has always known the whole of you, the version you've spent years trying to hide even from yourself. And knowing all of it, he has not turned away. This is worth repeating slowly. He has not turned away. Maybe you grew up believing that God's understanding worked like human understanding. Conditional, limited, dependent on how well you explained yourself or how good your behavior was that week. Maybe you pictured him a little like a strict teacher, someone who understood the rules but not the person breaking them. If that's the picture you've carried, it's worth setting down tonight, because the truth is far gentler than that and far more complete. God's understanding is not transactional. It does not increase when you behave well and decrease when you fail. It was never based on your performance in the first place. It flows from who he is, not from what you do. He understands you the same way in your weakest moment as he does in your strongest, because his understanding was never dependent on your strength to begin with. This means the version of you that shows up exhausted, irritable, discouraged, doubting. That version is understood just as fully as the version that shows up hopeful and steady. There is no need to wait until you feel spiritually put together before you come to him. There is no threshold of composure you need to reach. He meets you in the disheveled moments as readily as he meets you in the peaceful ones, because his understanding was never about your presentation. It was always about his knowledge of your heart. Consider how much lighter your days might feel if you actually believed this, not just as an idea you've heard before, but as something true in your bones. Imagine walking through a hard conversation, or a disappointing result, or a private struggle, and knowing, truly knowing, that you don't have to carry the added weight of feeling misunderstood by God on top of everything else. Imagine how much space that would free up in your mind, space that's currently spent managing an image, defending yourself internally, rehearsing explanations for a judgment that was never actually coming. There is a kind of tiredness that comes specifically from feeling unseen. It is different from physical exhaustion. It is the tiredness of carrying your full self alone, of translating your experience for people who can only receive part of it, of wondering if anyone would still love you if they saw everything. That particular exhaustion can begin to lift the moment you accept that you are already fully seen, already fully known, already fully loved by the one whose opinion actually holds your life together. Let's talk for a moment about doubt, because doubt is often one of the loneliest experiences a person can carry, especially within a life of faith. So many people quietly believe that doubt disqualifies them, that a strong faith should feel certain, unwavering, free of questions. And so, when doubt arrives, it often arrives with a second layer of shame stacked right on top of it. Not only am I struggling with doubt, but I feel guilty for doubting at all. But consider this. If God understands everything, then he understands doubt too, not as a failure to be corrected, but as a real and human response to living in a world that often doesn't make sense. He understands the confusion that comes after an unanswered prayer. He understands the disorientation of watching suffering unfold without explanation. He understands the quiet fear that maybe faith is just wishful thinking. These are not foreign to him. They are not surprises. He has already understood every question a human heart has ever asked, including the ones you're afraid to say out loud. This doesn't mean doubt is the goal, or that questions should be left forever unanswered, but it does mean you don't have to hide your doubt from God in order to remain close to him. You can bring the questions directly to him without pretending they don't exist. He is not threatened by your uncertainty. He is not offended by your confusion. He understands, and understanding is not the same as condemnation. Think, too, about the times you felt understood by another person, even briefly. Maybe a friend who really listened, without rushing to fix anything. Maybe someone who sat with you in grief without trying to explain it away. Those moments feel almost sacred, don't they? A rare kind of relief, the sense that you are not entirely alone in your experience. If a single moment of being understood by another flawed, limited person can feel that meaningful, imagine what it means to be understood completely, permanently, by the one who cannot fail to understand you. This understanding also extends into the parts of your story that feel unfinished. Maybe there's a relationship that never resolved the way you hoped. Maybe there's a version of your life you thought you'd have by now, and instead you're somewhere entirely different, quietly grieving a future that didn't happen. Maybe there's a wound from years ago that still aches when certain memories surface, even though you've told yourself you should be over it by now. God understands the unfinished parts too. He is not waiting for your story to be tidy before he engages with it. He is present in the middle of the mess, in the waiting, in the parts that haven't resolved yet and may not resolve for a long time. He understands the grief of unmet expectations. He understands the disappointment of a life that looks different than you imagined. He understands the quiet ache of comparing your story to someone else's and wondering why yours has been so much harder. There is also something to be said about the parts of yourself you don't understand. Maybe there are patterns you keep repeating and can't quite explain. Maybe there's a reaction you have that seems disproportionate, rooted in something you can't fully trace. Maybe there's a fear that doesn't make logical sense but shows up anyway, uninvited, at inconvenient times. You may spend years trying to understand yourself fully, and you may never get all the way there. But God already does. He understands the roots beneath the roots, the reasons beneath the reasons, the whole architecture of who you are, including the parts still hidden even from you. This means you don't have to fully understand yourself in order to be fully understood. You don't have to finish the work of self-discovery before you're allowed to be close to God. He is not waiting at the end of your healing journey, ready to meet you once you've figured everything out. He is present now, in the middle of the confusion, understanding what you cannot yet explain, holding what you haven't yet named. As we move toward the close of this time together, let this be the thought that stays with you longest. You do not have to translate your pain to be understood. You do not have to summarize your fear into something manageable. You do not have to organize your grief into clean sentences before you bring it forward. You can come exactly as you are, in all your complexity, all your contradiction, all your unfinished questions, and you will be met by someone who already understands the whole of it. Let your body settle into that truth now. Let your breathing slow. Let the tension in your shoulders soften, one small release at a time. You do not need to hold yourself together right now. You do not need to have the right words. You do not need to perform peace you don't feel. You are understood completely in this exact moment, exactly as you are, without a single explanation required. Let this be the last thing your mind carries as sleep begins to take you. Somewhere beyond your understanding of yourself, there is a deeper understanding already in place. Somewhere beneath every question you carry, there is an answer already known, even if it hasn't been revealed to you yet. Somewhere underneath the tiredness, the doubt, the grief, the quiet fears you've never spoken aloud, there is a steady presence that has never once been confused about who you are. God understands everything. Rest in that tonight. Not because you've earned it, not because you've explained yourself well enough, but because it has always been true, and it will still be true tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of your life. You are known. You are understood. You are safe. Let that be enough. Let it carry you gently into rest,